discussing ethics and its place in business, or even its place in marketing, since that's what we were just talking about a few of us an hour ago. What were we? Oh, free or paid in marketing in our X space. But anyway, where does ethics fit in business, or does it fit? Personally, I'd like to think that it fits.
I was going to say it better.
Well, yeah, I was trying not to be biased, although I will admit I am biased. I'd like to see ethics, and I've paid the price myself personally in life for ethics fitting in business. But I know that not all people think that. So rather than, is that I hope that's not a child lost. Really? We'll say a quick prayer that child is found. But as far as ethics, let's see. Who did we pick on last week? I think I picked on Nigel last week, didn't I? Can I pick on you, Tom?
Sure.
All right, I'll pick on Tom to start. And welcome, Gail. Welcome, Nigel. And welcome, Tom.
Greetings. Ethics is always an interesting conversation because there are people who believe their ethical standard is the standard. Theirs is the one. And I equate it sometimes to religion. People have such a dogmatic faith in certain things that you can use emotion, you can use logic. You're not going to persuade them of anything different. And so even the people who you would look at from an objective, societal, positive ethics viewpoint will sometimes say, well, I have my standards. And you're like, well, how low are they, though? I remember during my training, I was a federal attorney at the time, and the FBI came in, and there had been a bribery scandal going on at the location where I worked, and it had just flown under the radar. And they had surveillance tape of the guy accepting a bribe. The little pass the cash across the table, and he picks it up, leafs through it, shoves it in his pocket. I mean, they had him pulled.
It was on camera.
On camera. And they said to him, now, for that, we expect you to get this information. And he goes, oh, no. I've shared with you what I'm going to share with you. I have my standards. And we're all sitting there going, but what are they? And so my point is simply, we could talk about ethics, but so often we have to define the term in terms of what is the positive good that comes from it, which leads us into a philosophical discussion, whether it's Descartes or Voltaire or whomever, has a theory on these things, and all the philosophers do. But they're all over the place. So when I think of ethics, to kind of clear it up, it is maintaining the positive standards of conduct that do no harm. And I don't like that definition for a host of reasons, but sincerely, it's the best I've come up with. Real quickly, just to give another discussion point, if you all want it, when I teach ethics, and government contracting has a lot of ethical training that's required in it, as does my CLE, a minimum level of ethical classes. I can tell you another story about that. But nonetheless, when I teach it, I talk about how if I were to go into a class and say, how many of you believe that you are your ethical standard is higher than average? And invariably, nearly every hand goes up. And if it's a large enough class, I'm able to say, well, I appreciate your sentiment, but I hope you realize that statistically, half of you are wrong. Because only half of you can be above the standard if that's the way the statistical probability works. And they're looking at me like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? Well, our profession attracts only ethical people. And then I tell them the FBI surveillance tape story, and they go, oh, well, maybe it doesn't. And so what I typically say to people is that we all have our personal standard that we think is high, very high. And our laws will set a standard that is here somewhere. And there is a societal norm that kind of runs through the middle, because you can do things that fall below the societal norm of ethics that are not illegal. And that's why ideally you have that strata, the three structures. But what we're seeing is the law has been changed to go above societal standard. And we are now required in many cases to follow a law, a legislated law, it is not the way we used to do things. And a lot of people don't see a problem with the way we used to do things. So it's all these dynamics of our own personal standard, the societal standard, the legal standard, and how they if you try to chart them, boy, it gets crazy. So I come back to my original premise. Everybody has an ethical standard. You just don't know where it is. And they will refer to it as having ethics. We can debate that.
Wow.
I think
This is going to be deep.
in politics in particular, in government and in politics, we seem to have a problem in that bad actors are blackmailing people using video and honeypots and etc. And so it is hard for people. Like, you may have ethical standards, but if they come to you and say, we're going to kill your family if you don't do this, that becomes problematic. And I think that may be why we have so much corruption today.
Do you think there's more of that than there used to be back in when the
well, I
Teamsters
don't
were
know.
more
Maybe it was
prevalent? Or,
always
not to
corrupt.
blame. I didn't say Teamsters. I didn't say that.
No, yes, I think it probably do, because people's idea of what's moral and just has slid into the gutter. So yeah, I would say it is far worse than it used to be, but it's always existed. But
I think
Mob,
rampant.
to relate to what I said earlier, mob hitmen didn't have a problem with their job. That was just protecting the family. So that was a good ethical standard to go kill people.
Yeah, the mob had standards. They just weren't in alignment with most people's standards.
But then you could say the same for governments, because they have the same standards as the mob, because technically they're just holding everyone to blackmail to live in that society. If you wish to live in this society, you have to pay us taxes, and we can do what we like with those taxes, but we'll protect you. But that's where they let. And I think what we've got. I think what's happened is the quality of our politicians. Just taking that particular angle, the quality of our politicians has diminished so much that they're much more open to corruption. They're much more open to visual corruption, and I think they've got to a stage now where they just don't care, because no one can touch them, because all they do is. There's so many opportunities to remove individuals, and there are certain people that if you were friends with them 20 years ago when they were busy in their activities, then it's very dangerous to say anything against them, because you can just disappear. I think there was a case not recently, over the last 5 or 7 years, where an individual was found to have 3 gunshot wounds to the back of the head, and they were described as the worst suicide they'd ever seen. I mean, it's so obvious what they're doing that and the thing is they're being protected by other parts of the machinery. Sorry, I didn't want to get down into this deep thing, because if you're talking about ethics, where is the standard? And the standard for society should be slightly higher than everybody else's, but everyone should try to achieve that standard. And those who don't should be pointed, the finger should be pointed at them, and they should step down from any position they have in public life.
But to do that, we'd have to have a media that was honest. But media
exactly. We used to have a much more open media where it was balanced between the different factions, as it were.
There's too much money. The problem is we have incentivized things that cause people to misbehave. Like today, there is a guy called Leto's Law. It's a YouTube channel. He's a lawyer. And he brought up the story that 1,270 some odd people were arrested for drunk driving in Hawaii in the past year who tested not drunk. So they got arrested, even though they did the test, the blow the thing, and they had a lot of them 0.0 amount of alcohol in them, but they still got arrested. And then
Why?
those went to their DA, and the DA declined to prosecute 1,078. I mean, these are close numbers, but not the exact numbers. There's over 1,000 out of 1,200 and some. They didn't prosecute for lack of evidence because these people had been arrested for things that hadn't happened. And the reason that that was going on was that there were unwritten quotas, right? And so the police people had been told that in order to be doing their job properly, they had to make at least one DUI arrest a night, right? So they would just arrest the first person they stopped for DUI, even though they weren't, so that they could coast the rest of the day, is how he put it. So that all came down to somebody incentivized doing something stupid. The person in charge incentivized doing something stupid. And we have the same thing in business, right? So it's not just law enforcement and government, it's also business. When somebody at the top says, you must make X sales, here's your quota, you better make it or we're going to fire you, right? Then all those salespeople are doing things they would not normally do because they don't want to get fired and lose their income and lose their house and lose their family. We have way too much money making the decisions that shouldn't be driving ethics, right? We're
And
allowing
Gail,
money to mess up ethics.
I agree with you, Gail, and that's exactly what gave us Enron.
Yes. That was really, really evil. And those people doing it, let's see what happens if we just turn the power off, knowing how long it will take to restore the power, what that's going to cost from turning it off. I mean, those people have no ethics, but they probably don't know they have no ethics, right? It was, to them, it was, they made lots of money off of it, so it was okay, no matter who it hurt or what it did, and it probably even killed some people because they were on, some kind of life support and power went off,
Ventilator. Yeah.
right? And so we have elevated money to such a high level in America and other places that we have made money the god and everything else subservient to it. And that is why ethics is so messed up right now, and corruption is rampant everywhere, especially the United States.
Yeah. Is England doing, or Wales or Great Britain doing better
Yeah,
job than?
it's rampant here as well, and it's obvious in so many cases where friends of political our members of parliament, friends of theirs, received contracts, especially during COVID. Billions of pounds were given out to friends of politicians in contracts to supply personal protective, masks and all that sort of stuff. And these companies had never dealt in masks before, but they suddenly were mask dealers and testing equipment and everything else. And it was all a fad. I mean, we had they called them Nightingale hospitals set up all over the country because they were expecting to be millions of people suffering from this, from COVID. There's all the predictions, and I think they built something about 15 new hospitals with all beds in them. Everything was there to deal with the COVID increase, and they built them in a matter of like 6-8 weeks. And each one cost something like 30 or 40 million pounds to set up.
Wow.
So all the people supplying the bedding and all this other stuff were making a fortune out of it. They threw literally billions over the whole country, and not one person went into them.
Really?
Never used.
Wow. Wow.
And they've all been closed now and dismantled and everything else. And there's so many other things, and you see it all the time in political life where it's become a bit of a scam, a bit of a game, where we've had some like 4 prime ministers in the last 6 years, and each one of them has gone on to write books, get speaking events, one of them, Tony Blair, back in 2008, literally 5 days after he finished as prime minister here, he was speaking in China, and he was paid $500,000 to speak for 40 minutes.
$500,000 for speaking?
$500,000, yeah, just to speak for 14 minutes. But it was a payoff, and all he had to do was turn up and say a few words. And most people who were at the conference said it was boring, and he had nothing new to say. But we knew that before. But he has done so much damage to the political environment in the United Kingdom and society here. We've ended up with massive increases in migrants coming in, and unvetted, same as you've got in the southern border, and everything seems to bias towards anybody else other than the people, the indigenous taxpayers of this country. And it's the ethics of these people. It's like they pontificate and say, we're going to do for the last 14 years, the government's been saying they're going to reduce immigration. They keep talking about it, but no one takes any action. And whenever they do take action, it seems to be stopped by international agreements that they've signed up to, which we didn't, as citizens of this country. We didn't want to sign up to these international agreements, because if people had seen what was in them before we signed up, we would have. I think it comes down to there's a perception of democracy, but actually it's just all part of the grand plan. So it's best to live your life, avoid everything as much as possible, and if you can avoid paying tax, you won't be wasting your money, which is what they do. It seems like they get. Oh no, I'm talking politics. I don't want to do that. I'm moaning. I don't want to do that. I think from an ethics perspective in marketing, I mean, I think there's a huge thing. Is there such a thing as ethics in marketing?
It's a fine line, I think, on that.
Well, let me offer you this, Nigel, and maybe it's a good analogy. In teaching ethics classes, sometimes I'll use the example, particularly when it's in person and everybody drove to work in the morning, and I'll say, so how many of you came down the interstate? Okay. And what's the speed limit on the interstate? Normally it's 55 in urban areas. Say, okay, so 55. So, of course, none of you violated the speed limit. I mean, after all, it's a law that says you shall not exceed 55 miles per hour on these roadways. So none of you did anything illegal, let alone unethical, in the way you were driving. And invariably, I get two comments. One is, well, it's safer to go with the flow of the traffic. Maybe, but that's not what the law says. And the other one I get, and I love this one, well, it's only illegal when you get caught.
Yeah. When you get caught.
And you just got to shake your head and go, and these are people that are earning our tax dollars as government employees with that kind of a standard. It's frightening.
Yeah. And I think that's why I said earlier on, we need to have societal standards set slightly higher than everyone's standards, and everyone should be trying to achieve that one there. And there used to be a time when people saw something happening in society in surrounding them, they would go in and stop it. Not just the police doing it, but people would do it as well. Citizens would go and stop something untoward happening. These days, everyone stands around trying to get the best video clip so they can sell it online. And I think in some ways that has destroyed this community thing that everyone keeps shouting about. Everyone talks about community, and to be quite honest, there are groups of people who gather together and discuss and talk. But as far as community is concerned, how many of you know your neighbors? And probably you know in the States, you know your neighbors much better than we do here. I mean, I know my neighbor. Yeah, I know my neighbor one side. I am aware of a couple of people living in our street, but to be quite honest, I couldn't tell you what they did for jobs. Nothing. I know that two of my neighbors have got electric cars, but it's only because I can see them on their driveways plugged into these lights flashing on their wall. And I just look at it and I think, well, I just live my life in my own circle, and most of my friends and associates and family live in, anything up to 20, 30, 40 miles away. So I speak to them occasionally.
Government has caused some of that, right? So if you intervene, like there's a video right now on YouTube where the shoplifters were taking massive amounts of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a security guard and the person working in the store watching them do it.
Yeah.
And one of the other customers took offense.
Yeah.
Right.
I've
And
seen
so
that one.
he tried to stop them. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The reason that the store employees don't intervene is because they've been told they'll get fired if they do.
Yeah.
And the reason that the public doesn't intervene is a lot of times you'll get charged, right, for interfering. And so, but in some areas, right, that will not stop people. Like rural areas are different than cities.
Yeah.
I actually know quite a few of my neighbors, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know the people across the road. I know the people next door on that side and on this side. And then there's a little street down the road that goes off that way. And I know about 4 people that live on that street so far.
Mm-hmm.
And I've only been at this location for a year. So, I mean, they stop. Like if I'm outside out front, they'll stop and we'll talk and right. And they help me out once in a while. Like I'll say, hey, can you get me this when you're in town? And so in the country, it's a little different.
Yeah.
Right. It's like that. There's this song that guy got in trouble for. It's called Try That in a Small Town. Because literally, like if you were a bad guy, I think the bad guys will mostly stay in the city because your odds are better in the city.
Yeah.
Your odds are not very good in a rural area
Mm-hmm.
because they're like all the people out here hunt, right? So they have a gun of some kind and probably also a crossbow. And where I live, all my neighbors hunt. And a lot of them raise their own meat and process it themselves. Or at least
one thing I will say as an outsider looking in on America is don't fall for the same excuses that we were given years ago about arms. People in the UK could easily get hold of guns and that sort of stuff back up until probably the early 60s, and many people used to carry, but the laws have changed so much now that it's becoming harder and harder for us to do it. So that therefore politicians know there's no one out there who's going to kill them, so they can do anything they like.
Right. Well,
whereas you've got the First Amendment, which gives you the right to carry arms, and if the whole purpose, from what I've read about the Constitution, is that the whole purpose that the founding fathers gave you that First Amendment right. No, sorry, Second Amendment right. Is it the Second Amendment?
Yes, it's second.
Yeah, the Second Amendment right was to make sure that politicians were aware that they should be afraid of the population.
It's not just the politicians; it's the enforcers.
Yeah,
and they have been trying really hard to take weapons away from as many people as possible.
Yeah,
but they're going to have a really hard time with that, especially now that they've run all these people have come across the border, most of them fighting edge men from all these countries that don't like us.
Yeah,
they are going to have, it is near impossible for them to take weapons here.
Yeah,
because people won't volunteer. A lot of them are not registered, right? And a person that may have some registered guns may also have a whole lot of them that aren't. There are people like I worked with a guy that was like the quietest little meek guy in the world, and I found out he had 56 weapons. I'm like, 56? That seems excessive for anyone, honestly. And I know a lot of people with guns, but they normally have like a shotgun, a deer rifle, a turkey gun, whatever they use for that, I don't know. And maybe a pistol, right? So they might have a handful of guns, but they don't like own 56 guns. That's a little bit overdone. But they don't know how many guns there are.
How many pairs of shoes have you got?
What? Me?
How many pairs of shoes have you got, Gail?
I own 4 pairs of Western boots, 1 pair of lace-up boots, and a couple pairs of loafers, and no high heels or shoes. Or I don't understand the shoe thing. The only
Well,
reason
no,
I
no.
own that many boots is
My
because I
wife,
buy them used on eBay,
yeah,
because there's vintage Tony Lama boots you can't buy new anymore that I can
yeah,
buy on eBay for $35 to $70, which is
yeah.
a
No, what the reason
half.
why I said it, my wife is addicted to shoes, and she has a considerable collection of
Why
them.
though? I never got that. Or do you have
Oh,
a shoe
she
addiction, Deborah?
I don't have an addiction. I like shoes, but I don't have an addiction. But I like them, and then I'll wear the same. Like I have a pair of boots that I love,
yeah.
my go-go boots, and it's like 60s UK go-go boots, and I just wear those everywhere.
It's the reason why I asked the question is because I know a lot of women who have quite large collections of shoes, and you can only wear 1 pair at a time. And it's the same as
Yep.
you were saying about the individual with 54 guns. It's just the same. He's got a gun for every occasion, basically.
Yeah, you
My
don't
husband
really
has
need
that with
that.
guitars.
I can see having a half dozen, right?
Yeah,
I mean, because if you were under attack, like if a bunch of people who came to the country illegally got armed, they just ruled that they can be armed, which is kind of crazy.
yeah.
Have arms and come to your property, you'll need
Mhm.
more than one, or ability to reload quickly or something.
Mhm.
But if I were those people, it's just like if they try to send the National Guard or the military or the
Yeah,
police out to take away guns in a rural area, some of those people are going to get shot.
yeah.
And then the rest of the people are going to maybe think we don't really want to do this.
Mhm.
And so I think that they will have a very hard time. Plus, where I live, like it's really there's hills and rocks. And I
Mhm.
mean, it's like the ground is not flat,
Yeah.
right? And then local people hunt, so they know all the acres around here, right? I
Mhm.
live on 20 acres. There's hundreds of acres around me that have nothing on them but trees, deers, hogs, and turkey,
Yeah.
pretty much. And whatever else wanders through, bunny rabbits and stuff.
Mhm.
So if you come from outside and you don't know the area and
Mhm.
you're up against somebody who knows the terrain,
Yeah.
who has already decided that if you want to take their guns, they're going to kill you.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing I think that they're missing. Mercenaries can be tough if they don't think someone's going to shoot back.
Yeah.
But if you're a mercenary, they just hire some guy and say, we're going to pay you to hang out in America, and here's a phone, and we're going to call you up to go do whatever. When they go to do whatever and people are shooting back, they might not want to keep doing whatever, right? At least that's our hope, right? We can hope.
And Gail,
that
speaking of, I hate to do this to you.
Good time.
And thank you for tuning in. And we will see you same time next week at Next Level Success Roundtable. Thanks all.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Tom.
Bye.
And
Hope
thank you,
everybody
Gail.
thinks about ethics.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gail.
You might want to rethink your ethics given the state of the world.
Yeah.
Good closing.